welcome to the Newsx Sunday Guardian Roundtable. Well, the United States has a new president, and this week on the Roundtable, we are going to be discussing the impact of Donald Trump, not just on the US, but also on the India-US relations. Joining me on the Roundtable is Kiran Stacey. He's the South Asia correspondent of the Financial Times. We have Pramit Chaudhuri, Foreign Affairs editor for the Hindustan Times. We have Mr. Shashank, former Foreign Secretary, and Arvind Gupta. He's the head of the BJP's IT cell. And in today's world, IT is not income tax, it's information technology. So let's not confuse that.
That's true.
That is true. But Arvind, before I begin, you and I had a discussion last week, 2 weeks ago, I think, where we discussed the hidden vote, the Brexit vote. You know, is there a hidden vote for Donald Trump? Because all the pollsters, of course, were predicting a Clinton win. So, and you had in fact said that Trump would win. So, congratulations on getting it right.
Thank you.
And can you explain the logic behind why were you thinking that he would win?
See, and again, I think the national polls have actually been proven correct. I mean, if you look at it.
The popular vote.
The popular vote has been won by Hillary Clinton. And when you look at America, it's not about popular vote. It's about those swing states and winning those swing states. So you can win California by 70-30 or 50-48. You'll still go to carry every single vote of California. But the election really, and we have said it before, was fought in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, Colorado. And those states were clearly voting on issues which was more identified with President-elect Trump now, which was jobs, and the cost of living, and he brought out a new thinking in that, and the hope of the Clinton campaign of attracting all women voters didn't work. So combined these three factors, I think President-elect Trump came out on tops, and I think the data was always suggesting that.
Data was suggesting that, but we missed the big picture, or did you get it right?
No, I don't think we did miss the big picture. I'm going to launch a defense now of political correspondents everywhere.
Okay.
And I'm someone who also reported on Brexit. What I think is that what we knew is that there was a large section of the population who felt this way, who were angry, whether it was about jobs, whether it was about immigration, whether it was about cost of living. We knew that people were angry about modern life and they wanted to go back to something else. What we didn't know is whether that was 45% of the population or 51% of the population. And really, we relied on the pollsters to tell us where the needle was going. But in terms of what this tells us about the US, I don't think the result tells us anything we didn't know before the election, apart from one thing, which is that Hillary did not motivate her supporters to come out. That doesn't really tell us necessarily the state of America. What told us the state of America was the fact that we even got to this position in the first place, where Trump became the candidate, where Trump was looking at least 45% of the voter turnout. That is the big story. You know, we should focus on the fact that this is a huge chunk of the American population. Whether it is, as I say, 45 or 51% matters for the election, it matters for the next few years, but it doesn't tell us anything different about America, really.
Pramit?
Yeah, I think as we mentioned on the popular vote, they more or less got it right. And keep in mind, it was still a very close vote. Even with a 2% additional swing in Hillary's favor, she would have won a lot of the swing states, enough to be able to win the Electoral College. So it was difficult to call. And I think, like, for example, I had been saying that Hillary would win, largely because she had to only win 2 or 3 of the swing states. And the fact that she lost all of them was actually a surprise for me. I thought she would squeak by in a couple of these places. And I think, again, the turnout issue was crucial. Only half of African Americans came out, well below the 68-70% who came out for Obama. A large chunk of the Hispanic population, Florida, 30% of the Hispanic population voted for Trump. And then finally, as has been mentioned, even a majority of women voted for Trump. And the depth of the anger, we had an understanding how angry it was. We did not get a sense, as the issue was turnout, of how angry this would be, and resulting in a huge surge of votes among white working class. The white working class average turnout is only about 55% in most US elections. This time it's probably close to about 65-70.
Yes, 2/3, yes.
Yeah. And that was huge. I mean, that is still by far the single largest chunk of the American population. I remember when I was watching the results coming out, I immediately realized she was in trouble when in Michigan, the rural vote, which traditionally is about 15 to 17% of the turnout, soared to 30. And that was all working class white men coming out to vote in huge numbers. In an election they really felt they had to get somebody who was different from the traditional political mainstream of America.
If I can add to what Pramit is saying, it's very interesting actually, and that's where I think the Clinton campaign missed the trends and the data. Mr. Trump played it very well according to data and demographics. See, one thing I was hearing was that candidate Clinton did not even go and canvass after her candidature in Wisconsin.
Michigan or Wisconsin, neither state did
neither
she
state,
visit.
and these are two critical states.
Yes.
So I mean, there was some disconnect between the voter and the data and the campaign strategy, and I think that has cost her the election.
Yeah.
I think this is going to trigger a huge bout of introspection from pollsters and political data scientists everywhere, because they've got to go and revisit a lot of what they assume to be true. Things about turnout, things about who gets motivated by what, where are the swing states, who are the populations we need to focus on. And it's a very difficult science to get right, especially in very divided societies.
Okay, Arvind, can you also help us decode the women vote? You know, we know where the rural, the working class vote really went. But the women, why would they vote for Trump? I'm a little surprised.
See, I think in the last maybe 3 weeks, that time candidate Trump actually softened up his stand and his image also, if you look at it purely from an image perspective. So something was that he, after the second debate, the Trump tapes, when it came out, really hit him. So he knew the corrective action to take, which a little bit he took. He, brought out the family angle in him and things like that. So that helped his image a little bit. The second thing is his campaign managed to create enough fear, uncertainty, doubt on Hillary Clinton. That can you trust her?
Yes.
And I think that worked. I mean, clearly it worked. And the women which Hillary Clinton was so much banking upon to vote for her didn't really come out and vote. Yeah.
Kiran, would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's definitely.
And how much did Michelle help? No, Michelle helped Hillary. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I think that's the issue. Hillary is actually the question we should be asking ourselves about now. As you look at the voter turnout, Trump didn't get. In fact, I think Trump got fewer votes than 2012, than the Republicans got in 2012. So this was not a Trump being massively popular. This was the Democrat vote just collapsing, really. So the question is not, well, there is certainly a question.
So Hillary lost it rather than Trump won it.
And Trump won many more, certainly white women, than we expected him to. And maybe that tells us that women don't vote en bloc, in any particular way as a woman. Neither do men vote as men. Just 50% of the population is very diverse. They're voting.
So your data have to relook the gender breakup of votes.
Yeah, it is important. What Kiran is saying is true, because it's actually very specific to the issues that matter to them. And it's wrong to do this mass blocking of any segment, right? It's a lot about what's in it for me, a lot of personalization in that.
I mean, if you look in the past, white working class women and white middle class women never voted together. I mean, there was very little overlap between the two.
Absolutely.
There was a very clear class divide on this issue. And in this case, the decision for a lot of women was, especially in the working class, is the economics going to be more important than the question of misogyny? And the economics simply overrode it. And I always believe whenever anybody says, I'm a Bengali who comes from a Marxist family, but they were always very clear. Economics is number one. And people will vote on their pocketbooks more than anything else, except in a time of war. That's the only exception to the rule.
Okay. You want to come in on this?
Well, I would only say that the women who would have normally voted or who perhaps voted for Obama did not come out to vote, because they found that Hillary was perhaps involved in corrupt activities, perhaps there was this problem of the personal emails, and the final statement which came from the FBI director, that was from a person who was having some sexual things with some schoolgirl or some minor. So therefore it came out very clearly that the other side also, and since Trump kept talking about Bill and his friend Bill,
correct.
So that was also in the minds of many of these ladies. They said, look, I mean, what is the difference between the two sides? So therefore they didn't want to vote for Trump, but they didn't want to vote for Hillary also. They stayed home.
One thing I would just add is I don't think in this vote or in Brexit people really, I don't think the economy was the main thing in the end. That was what really shocked me. No, I don't think. If you polled people on, certainly in the UK, because I was covering it at the time, what do you think would benefit your wallet the most? Staying in the EU, leaving the EU? Most people said staying in the EU. The thing was, they were so angry about a range of other issues, including immigration. This was for the first time they seemed to vote against what they saw as their own economic interest. And I think some of that is true of Trump as well. People thought, yeah, Hillary will manage the economy okay, but hey, it's not benefiting me anyway. Let's just rip it up and go for something else, even
so
if
it's
I
a vote against status quo rather than...
I would have to disagree as well. The issue is that you're looking at it only in terms of GDP growth or job creation in the past 6 months or 1 year. Yes, theoretically Obama had done a good job. But if you're a white working class person, over the past 3-4 decades, you have seen your real income decline, you've seen your jobs collapse. There's an excellent book called Hillbilly Elegy, written by an American, I guess he's a think tank person, who comes from a white working class background, I think in Appalachia. And he describes the disintegration of his family, where his wife, drug addiction, his mother ends up with 16 partners in her lifetime, and the disintegration of the entire community structure because of the collapse of the manufacturing sector of the United States. For them, these little blips in GDP growth over 6 months or 1 year were completely irrelevant. The real issue was that everything that they had thought they were working towards had completely gone, and that was the real economic issue. It wasn't...
If you see, if I can just add to what Pramit is saying, it's very relevant because I, over the summers, spent a significant amount of time talking to the drivers, the shared economy, the Uber, the Lyft, the sidecar doesn't exist any longer, but those drivers, right? They were clear. They have lost their job, and they are now working to keep food on the table, and they were clearly not going to vote for the establishment, which Hillary Clinton represented, right? I mean, whatever her economic policies may be, they think they have been impacted by the last 8 years of that. So, I think it was about money in my wallet, jobs. It was all about that.
But I wonder if they really believe that Trump's going to change that, or whether they just... There was a really interesting piece.
That's a separate issue.
It is. No, I agree.
They
They didn't want the status quo.
They didn't want the status quo.
So they would have voted for Bernie Sanders, and a lot of them did during the primaries.
Absolutely.
But I think also the other interesting thing is, the FT interviewed a lot of coal miners in Pennsylvania. And one thing they said is that Donald Trump's come, he says he's going to reopen the mines. And then the interviewer said, do you believe this? They said, no, it's impossible. Of course he's not. But at least he's on our side. So it's almost like there's a feeling now that politics doesn't matter. We're impacted much more by globalization and forces outside our control. What we want is a cheerleader, not a governor. And that's a really interesting shift.
That's a very interesting shift. You want to come in on this?
No, I don't want to go into that issue regarding the attachment, let's say the adherence to the international globalization norms. But what I feel is that these people are expecting very strongly that Trump would do something completely different. He's a businessman, he's from outside politics. And now you see the Marrakesh conference has been thrown into utter confusion because people do not know whether he would try to go for the fulfillment of the Paris decisions, or would he go completely against that. So like you're talking about the coal mines, I mean, he would just say, okay, clean coal technologies are available. So why do you want to just dump all the coal mines?
So can he make good his rhetoric? You know, a lot of relations are not really on individuals, but where the countries are placed, the geostrategic compulsions also come in.
Yeah, but I think, as was mentioned, a lot of people, including us, very often have no idea what big global shifts are taking place and how they actually directly affect our lives. But the narrative is what is important in this. And for a lot of white working class, they'll see this man throw away the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He says TPP is over. I will go down no more FTA agreements. I'll even attempt, probably unsuccessfully, to renegotiate NAFTA. For them, it's not that they actually understand whether NAFTA really affected them or not. But for them, it's part of the narrative that they blame. We know that NAFTA happened and my life begins to disintegrate after that. It may have had absolutely nothing to do with NAFTA. It's probably due to technology, labor wages, the opening up of China into the international system are almost certainly much more important. But he's going to be sitting there and saying, I'm going to do something for you. And for a lot of it, you know, as a journalist, I've always been struck by the fact that when we would do a story on somebody who would have a complaint about something or another, we would go and interview him. He'd appear on page 1, this policeman did something terrible, blah, blah. and I'm going to do something about it. A week later, you go there and ask him, well, did you file the complaint? He said, no. I said, why? Well, I felt very good after the media covered me, and I'm okay. My neighbors have all come in, so you showed them. Good man. And then after that, it's all right. I didn't bother.
Well, see, this is the interesting question. This is exactly the question we need to ask ourselves next, which is what happens if Trump doesn't deliver? I mean, he's not somebody who knows the machinery of government. Can he deliver? Can he deliver? On most of what he said, I don't think he can. So then what do voters do? Do they say, well, we're really angry, so we're going to go back? Or do they say, well, you gave it a go, and we're willing to back you for that? And then an interesting parallel with this is Syriza in Greece. So Syriza came in and they said, we're going to renegotiate the EU bailout package, and we're going to get out of these harsh conditions that have been imposed on us, particularly from Berlin. And they completely failed. And in fact, they got worse conditions. But they didn't get punished by the voters, because the voters turned around and said, hey, at least you tried. We think you're on our side. And it would be interesting if the American voters do something similar. If they turn around to Trump at the end of 4 years and he hasn't achieved anything, it's possible that they'll say, well, at least you tried. We'll give you another chance.
And how much? We're going to discuss this, but a short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to the Newsx Sunday Garden Roundtable. We are taking a look at the impact of Donald Trump's presidency, not just on the United States, but also on India. I think we need to focus on the India-US relations. How would that be impacted? With Hillary, there was a certain status quo.
No, among the Indian intellectuals, there was generally attachment to Hillary's campaign. They were more on her side. But as far as the BJP is concerned, they were very happy that some of the slogans of Narendra Modi were picked up by Trump.
So I'd have to disagree with that. He was doing it on his own. Let me do that.
No, he may have done it on his own, which means that your overseas friends in
well, they saw the
USA,
similarity, I guess, more than
they were doing quite
copyright
well.
violation.
They were able to perhaps point out to Trump that there is a
but
guy
we welcome
in India.
his presidency. Let me also do that.
Well said. How do you see it working out?
Yeah, I think there'll be one of the things that has been evident to anybody who's been in Washington over the past 3 or 4 years is that India has actually one of the strongest bipartisan consensuses in the United States. There are disagreements about China, about even Europe, definitely about Russia. But on India, I have struck by the fact that I can meet an ultra-conservative senator from South Carolina like Joe Wilson, or I can meet an ultra-liberal from New York, and they all come and say exactly the same thing. India is a relationship that makes sense to us, both strategically, economically, militarily. It's been helped by the fact that Indian Americans are seen across the board as a model immigrant community. And I'm continually amazed when I go to Congress, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, they say, more Indians, nobody has a complaint about them. So overall, the relationship is sound. There'll be tweaks. There will be areas, for example, climate change. Narendra Modi takes climate change as an existential threat. He's going to now be facing for the first time a president who basically said, I don't even think it exists. So we will probably still have a clean energy relationship, but we may have to explain it differently. We'll have to say, okay, support our clean energy program, give us the finance, give us the technology, but do it for geopolitical reasons. So we can reduce dependence on Saudi Arabia or something like that. But okay, it's not in climate change. You don't support us in climate change. That's fine. We'll change the nature of the language. The relationship underneath will remain the same.
So to sell the pitch differently, right?
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think it will be more bilateral between India and US rather than
the hyphenated.
Yeah, and secondly, I think. As Pramit has already explained, from an India perspective, it's very bipartisan support there. Indians, the illegal immigrant pitch of President-elect Trump does not really apply to people of Indian origin because they've been the value creators, the job creators. So he's on board on that. The outsourcing industry in India has nothing to worry about, and I've always said it before, and I'm continuing to say that. So I think it's going to be business as usual plus.
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I think that once anti-immigrant rhetoric sets in a country, first of all, people don't actually define between different groups. And we've seen that in the UK after Brexit, which was supposed to be about EU immigration, if anything. you had all sorts of other people suddenly coming in for racial abuse who had nothing to do with the EU vote whatsoever. So I would actually be worried about the attitude towards Indian immigration. And Trump's talked about restricting H-1B visas and talked about Indians taking jobs. I'm not sure everything is positive on that front. But I think the underlying trends are still positive for the US-India relationship. And a big reason for that is America drawing down from Afghanistan. When they were really involved in Afghanistan, they wanted Pakistan on side. And that meant they could only ever be slightly equivocal in their relationship with India. As that dynamic has shifted, I think the US has found a more natural ally in India. And actually, that's interestingly having some knock-on effects with India's relationship with Russia. And it would be very interesting to see how those three countries now interact, where you've got the possibility of a US-Russia really close relationship.
That's true. The global roundtable is going to be very different now with Putin, with Trump and Prime Minister.
I'm not very sure about Afghanistan, whether they have taken a final view of continuing the withdrawal from Afghanistan, because they will have to take a completely different position now about Middle East and Afghanistan, because Trump feels that it was the policies of the Democrats in the last 8 years that has given rise to all these Daesh and Al-Qaeda and all these various people. So I'm quite sure that they will work out a new relationship, perhaps try to see that somehow they can take advantage of the Russian anger over the Daesh people, and they will perhaps support them in exterminating these guys. About Afghanistan, I'm not very sure. I mean, because the Middle East, these people are so deeply involved that they started disconnecting themselves from Afghanistan. But I think now they may have to think that if Iran has to be brought into the mainstream and somehow controlling the ambitions of Saudi Arabia, Qatar and all that, then America has to be present on the other side of Iran in Afghanistan also, just to see that things are kept in check. Also, I think the other thing I would say that Russia-America relationship will never be the kind of relationship people would like to see, that they are very, very strong partners. Only thing is that yes, Russia may try to have better relationship than in the past, and perhaps the countries in our region will not be destabilized to that extent, and pressure would be put on Pakistan and on China. And I think that should be welcomed by the Indians.
That would be very welcome. Last word from you, Kiran. You know, we saw candidate Trump, then we saw President Trump. I mean, his speech, America for everyone, and et cetera, et cetera. Is that just rhetoric by necessity, or is it something that you see?
It was interesting, wasn't it? His acceptance speech was not what I was expecting.
Exactly.
I thought he would take the chance to go and dish it out against his enemies. So clearly somebody has persuaded him that is not a good way to start off your presidency. I don't know if he'll carry that on. It's obviously not where his instincts lie. And often I think you find with presidents, they're defined in moments they don't expect. They're defined by events that come up, and it's how they respond to those events. Obama's first administration, for example, was defined a lot by the financial crisis, which is not something he expected to have to deal with. And those are the moments where your instincts and your character really shape your presidency. So I think even if President Trump wants to be an inclusive president, I don't think that is very deep within him. It would be interesting to see if he's able to carry that on.
And for how long he stays off the Twitter handle. That's also very interesting to watch.
Not very
He'll
long.
have multiple handles to manage now. So.
Say someone who handles that's a nice input. But thank you for this. Thank you for watching this show. We'll see you again same time next week.